Today is Friday, September 7th, 2018. My name is Judy Herrera, and I'm at the CalVet home in Ventura, California. It is my honor and pleasure to interview Mack Edwards on behalf of the Conejo Valley chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution and Colonial Dames 17th Century for the Veterans History Project with the Library of Congress. This interview is being recorded by Ed Lynch from Advanta Videography and contains the reflections and memories of the veteran during his time in the Army. This is Mack's story. Mack, you were born in Manhattan Beach, California, to Carl and Dorothea Edwards, one of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. You grew up in a loving musical family. You graduated from Redondo Beach High School in 1939. You were working for Firestone Tires in Southgate when you married your wife of 74 years, Joan Lowry. When you turned 21, you received your draft notice to report to Army Boot Camp. It's 1942. Do you want to pick up your story there?
All right. I was sent to Fort MacArthur in San Pedro, and that was quite an experience for me. A naive young man. We got in line to get haircuts, and I saw my beautiful blonde hair laying on the floor after about 5 minutes. And I had a very short haircut. And we had to wait in a long line for our vaccinations of whatever, one kind or another. It was quite a long line. And I finally made it to the 2 soldiers who were standing with hypodermic needles on both sides, and I got shot, bingo, really quick. And I said to one of them, "That was really fast. Is that all there is to this?" And one of them said, "That's all there is to it. Go in that room there and sit down," which I did. I went in and sat down and woke up on the floor. I had passed out and didn't know it. First time I had ever passed out. Anyway, we went from Fort MacArthur on a train, headed for Oklahoma City, and I was sitting next to a soldier that I had never seen before. And he looked kind of pale, and he had sweat on his forehead, and I said, "You don't look like you feel very well." And he said, I really don't feel very well." And being the naive person I was at that time of my life, I said, "What's the matter? Do you have the flu or something?" And he said, "No, I need a drink." And he told me that he drank a 1/5 of booze a day. Anyway, we got well acquainted, and more so in Oklahoma City, where we were sent, and we became very fast friends. We had our boot camp in Oklahoma City at Tinker Field, which was called before that, I think, Oklahoma City Air Depot. And I believe Tinker Field now is one of the largest supply depots for the Air Force. I can't remember how many weeks we were there. I got a phone call. Before that, the first sergeant of the company came in and asked if there was anybody who could type. And I raised my hand because we weren't doing anything. We were just sitting around talking. So I became the company clerk of the 2472nd Quartermaster Truck Company.
What kinds of things did they have you do during your time in Oklahoma? What training were they giving you?
Well, we were a truck company, so we were issued, 50 trucks and jeeps and weapons carriers and we had to learn all about the trucks, and we were tested to drive them and trained to drive, and that's pretty much of what we did as far as the equipment is concerned. We had weapons, of course, and we were trained on long hikes and driving at night with no lights on, which was really kind of scary. And we did long drives around Oklahoma to some of the small towns, and we were treated just beautifully by the people. And one day I got a phone call from a man who identified himself as Tom O'Donnell, and he said, "I'm a friend of a friend of a friend of my wife's mother, and I want to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner, to come in and have Thanksgiving dinner with our family.
Wow.
And bring a friend." So I brought the friend, Joe Slayton, who I had met on the train from Fort MacArthur. And they had quite a large family, and we had a lovely Thanksgiving dinner. And later on, that couple, Tom and Alma O'Donnell, became quite a haven for us. As I moved up in grade, I was able to live off the base. My wife came from Manhattan Beach to live with the O'Donnells, and I was able to spend a lot of time in a very pleasant home and with some very, very lovely people. In fact, my oldest son is named after Tom O'Donnell.
Oh, nice.
So, after a time, we got our orders to go overseas, of course, and my wife moved back to Manhattan Beach. We were sent to Newport News, Virginia, and which was quite an experience. We were quarantined there for a week or more while we were waiting to get on our ship. And a funny incident happened there when one of our company, we had two barracks, and they had pull string on the lights, and where he got the booze to be inebriated, I have no idea, because we were quarantined and had MPs on the gates and everything. But he was running through each barracks, turning the lights on and off and on and off, and I couldn't get him to stop it, so I called the MPs, and they came and got him, and we never saw any more of him.
Oh, by this time, what was your rank?
Hmm?
By this time, what was your rank?
By this time, I was the first sergeant of the company, yes,
Nice.
which is the top enlisted man of the company. We had, I believe, 4 officers, and we were placed aboard a ship to go overseas, and I noticed that it was a very, very large luxury liner. And I noticed the name on the ship was, pause, please.
Oh, it's Empress. It was the Empress of Japan.
It said on the side of the ship, Empress of, and the rest of the name was chiseled off. And after we got aboard, we learned that previously to the war was the Empress of Japan. And it suddenly became the Empress of Scotland. It was a British liner.
Okay.
So we went from Newport News, Virginia to, we stopped at, the ship went along. It was a very, very fast ship, and so we went by ourselves. We stopped at Cape Town, South Africa, and we got off for a day or two in time to have dinner with a very gracious Dutch lady who was a picture with her white hair and a black gown and white lace around her neck and her wrists and I asked her if she was British, and she got kind of indignant and said, "No, I am Dutch." Anyway, we went from Cape Town to around the Horn and went to Bombay. And we had a couple of days there, and we were able to visit the town of Bombay, which was probably the dirtiest city that I have ever been in my life.
Yeah.
So we didn't see much there of interest. We were put on a train and sent to Calcutta. And from Calcutta we were issued all of our trucks and jeeps and so on, and weapons, and we drove to the little town of Kragapur, which was about 15 miles from our base to be. We were set up in a base about 15 miles away, and it took us 2 or 3 weeks to get settled in. An incident there. We were in these large native-built barracks with thatched roofs and so on, and of course we had these native beds, and all the beds had mosquito bars, mosquito netting over them.
Sure.
And since we had no lights except a flashlight, so we went to bed early, and in an hour or so, one of the GIs there just started to scream, just screaming his head off. And of course we got our flashlights and everybody jumped up, and this man had gotten a bat inside of his mosquito netting. And of course he scared him to death.
Of course.
Anyway, we were there for a short time. Our CO wanted to get away from the hubbub of the big base, so we took a site about a mile away and erected I think we probably had about 20 English tents, which were very cool, or not very cool, but they were cooler in the summer. And another incident, they were building an airstrip there for the B-29s, which were soon to come. So our ingenious members of our group took the bars and tarps off of their trucks so they looked like the regular engineering dump truck, went under the huge cement mixers and brought back load after load of cement, and we all had nice cement floors for our tents.
Instead of the dirt, right? Instead
of the dirt, yeah. And we were there for some time. We had a motor pool. We had revetments for our equipment and so on, a big brick, what we used as a warehouse, and things were such in India that you had to lock your weapons up.
Okay.
Because the natives there would steal anything that wasn't nailed down. So we had a nice camp of our own. We were there. The B-29s came flying in, which was quite a sight. They were like a bunch of flying freight cars.
Yeah, huge.
And that was their first mission of the war, was to come to India. And what their duties were there, they would load up with extra gasoline and bombs or mines and fly over the hump, the Himalayas, to one of or more of the 8 bases that we had in China. And they would leave the extra gasoline and extra bombs and fly back, and they would load up with more gas and more bombs and fly over again, pick up what they needed at the base, and then go to bomb Manchuria, or in some cases Japan or Thailand. And that's what their duties were for some time. From that point, the military in the Pacific began to take islands that closer and closer to Japan, like Okinawa and Iwo Jima, and they were building airfields. So the B-29s of the 20th Bomber Command were transferred to the Pacific. And we, of course, stayed where we were and were eventually assigned to the 10th Air Force in China, which in the early part of the war were were known as the Flying Tigers. So when they got the airfields close to Japan, they transferred the B-29s to the Pacific, and they began to bomb Japan on a regular basis with fire bombs extensively, and eventually the atom bombs that were dropped, and really ended the war. Now, after the B-29s left, we were transferred, like I said, to the 10th Air Force. So we were on our way to China, and got to a little town of Michino, and I couldn't tell you how to spell it.
It's okay.
And on the way to that little town, I woke up one night about midnight with a lot of noise and guns going off, and I was trying to sleep on a flat car in a Jeep, and people started shouting, "The war is over." That's when the war ended. I couldn't tell you what that date was, but we went on to Michino and over the Burma-Lido Road, which was quite an experience. We got to Michino, and of course everybody was hot and dusty and tired, and we all went and jumped in the river there. And we weren't in the river very long, and we found out that we were covered with leeches. We had leeches all over us, and of course we had to pull them off, and we quit bathing in the river. We were there for, I don't know how long, a month, maybe 2 months. And then we were sent to a replacement depot in Calcutta, and were there for several months. And our company, being a truck company, we hauled many troops who were coming into this replacement depot from China and Burma and other places. We would haul them to the boats, or probably in several cases to an aircraft, where they were being sent home.
Okay, back to the United States.
Back to the United States. And one day I heard my name called, and I was told to report to headquarters, and I was assigned to a little freighter to come home, and I think there were about 26 of us on board that freighter.
So Matt, could you tell us a little bit about your experience on the Burma-Lido Road?
Probably most people who are aware of World War II knew about the Burma-Lido Road, which was a road that was constructed through Burma and pointed toward China, and that's where the supplies, land-wise, were trucked into China.
There was still desperate need for a land bridge. So at the end of 1942, a road was started. The Lido Road. Starting at Lido in northern India, the plan was to drive through jungles, rivers, mountains, and Jap opposition to a juncture with the Burma Road. A supply route would then be forged from Calcutta to Lido by rail, across the Lido-Burma Road to Kunming, and thence to Chungking in China. Burma's mountains, rivers, railways, and highways extend from north to south. To push through this new road, the Allies would have to fight against the grain from west to east. The Lido Road was begun by a handful of men facing a task that had been called impossible. And so, with inadequate machinery and tools, a few American engineering units with a detachment of Chinese engineers and what Asiatic labor could be had started one of the greatest road building jobs in history. Again and again, they saw their work collapse as the monsoon washed away whole stretches. But the road inched along. At the docks in Calcutta, second largest city of the British Empire, supplies from America and Great Britain and the factories of India were piling up, waiting to be hauled to the Lido Road and the hump.
And that road was a very difficult road to build, and they had, in some places, it was so, the water level of the ground was so close to the top that if you put a caterpillar on top of it, it would simply sink into the ground. And they had a terrible time getting through that swampy stuff. And so they cut down a lot of timber. There were a lot of logs that were actually became part of the road. And there were many tons of supplies that went over that road to China and also to Burma, which was the Japanese, and I don't know that a lot of people knew it, the Japanese overtook a great deal of Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and were well into India before the American and British military was able to stop them as they were coming into India. They were on their way to take India. And so
this road was built by the Army Corps of Engineers?
It was built by the Army Corps of Engineers, troops, and also by a lot of native workers. Burma, of course, is very wet. Gets a lot of rain. They raise a lot of rice. And so
that was the road that you were on when you found out
we drove over that road, and not only took our trucks, but we were assigned about 50 extra trucks that we were to take into China. And there were some lives lost in the construction of the Burma-Lido Road, and some going over it too.
So this is the road you were on when VJ Day happens and you find the war's over.
That's true.
So you're back in Calcutta, and you get called up to go home.
I got called up to go home and was surprised to get on this little freighter with 26 other GIs. I think there were several officers on board. And we sailed down the Hooghly River out into the Indian Ocean at full speed, went up through the canal into the Mediterranean. The weather was absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
And one thing that everybody noticed when we were on this little ship was that we could go into the ship's mess and look up on a blackboard, and you could pick out your breakfast, whether it was grapefruit or whether you had white toast or wheat toast, or you could have pancakes or you could have eggs, or which was really delightful because we weren't used to that kind of thing.
Nice.
So we sailed into the Mediterranean, stopped there in the docked for a short time. I guess they have to regulate the ships going through, and there were a bunch of natives that came on board with, it looked like cut glass, but they said they were rubies and emeralds and so on. I didn't buy anything there, but so we sailed out into the Mediterranean, into the Atlantic, excuse me, into a horrific storm, to me anyway. And I had a bunk on the boat deck, or top deck, I guess you'd call it. And I woke up one night and water was coming in the porthole. So I thought, boy, that water is up high. So in the morning we were able to look out and we saw waves that looked like they were 50 or 60 feet high. And this little boat would just run head on into this thing and would just shudder like, and like it almost would stop. And you could hear the propeller going so fast. It was clear out of the water.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, how in the world are we going to make this? Anyway, we did. We hadn't probably been out a day or two, and one of the boilers on the ship went out, blew it up or something. So we were proceeding through the storm at about 3 knots. And then they lost the electric steering and the hydraulic steering. So they had to put a man on the fantail where they had a big wheel. And the only compass they had that was working was on the bridge, so they had to rig a telephone line from the bridge to the fantail. So whoever was steering the boat from the fantail knew which way to go. And we could look back and see our wake, which was kind of wobbly. Anyway, it took us 30 days to get to Baltimore.
Oh my.
And it was so foggy when we got to Baltimore that the pilot who was to take us into the harbor would only allow the boat to proceed if the first mate was standing on the steering on the fantail. But we did get in, and I think we were sent to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, if I remember.
Was your wife, how was you communicating with your family while you were in India?
I think they called it B-mail.
Okay.
Where they would take your letter after it was censored and take a picture of it so it was like on microfilm.
Okay.
And they sent this microfilm, of course, back to the United States. And then they would take a photo of that, which would be maybe half of a letter page size, 8 by 11 or whatever.
Okay.
So they called that B-mail. I think that was the name of it.
And then in reverse, did you get letters from family and your wife and your mom and?
Yes, yeah. Quite regularly we got mail.
So they expected you to be home. They knew you were coming
They knew
home.
I was coming home.
Oh, okay,
yes.
great.
Yes.
So do you want to? I understand you had an older brother that was also in World War II. Did you want to share a little bit?
Yes, my brother Holly, which was my older brother, who was with Patton's group that went into Europe a little later than the Normandy landings. He didn't talk a great deal about his service, but I knew it was pretty rough, and he was with the group that rescued the troops at the Battle of the Bulge. and he was given a field commission and made a first or second lieutenant, which I thought was quite an honor. And yeah, he saw a lot of hard fighting in Europe. Yes, he did.
We're grateful for his service as well. So you finally make it back to the United States. You're at Camp Kilmore in New Jersey. And then what'd they do with you?
Well, we arrived there to a big steak dinner with a big lettuce and tomato salad, and it was really glorious. And one thing I noticed, we were there for several days, there were a lot of Italian and German prisoners of war there. And I never saw a bunch of happier people than those prisoners of war. Both the Italians and the Germans were constantly marching and singing, and they had a lot of work for them to do, and we could hear them going by, but they were very happy to be in the United States and as a prisoner of war, I suppose. So we left there. I think I came home on a C-54, which was quite a flight, into Long Beach, and was let out of the service in Fort MacArthur, where I joined up.
Okay, very nice. Your family was excited
And
to have you
my wife was
back?
there to meet me, happily,
Oh.
and that's pretty much the story of my life, yes.
Well,
My
that's the
life
story.
in the service.
Life in the service. And then what did you do after the service?
Well, I went back to the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. They were very, very receptive to me coming back. I had worked in the plant before, actually part of the tire manufacturing process, which I didn't want to go back into, and I asked them if I could go into sales, and they said, "You certainly can." So they put me through a sales school with a lot of real nice people. And I eventually managed a store in Redondo Beach. I left Firestone at that point for some pretty good reasons, and went into the grocery business, which was good to me. And we owned a little market in Hermosa Beach, which we sold, I think, in about 1972. I got back into sales, eventually wound up at our little ranch in Springville with about, I think we originally had 15 acres. We gave a couple of acres to one of our sons who built a home there. I planted probably 1,000 trees, apple and peach, and in the process I patented a white peach, which is called Edwards Ambrosia Peach Tree, and it is a delightful tree, delightful fruit. And eventually my age caught up with me, and I could no longer do the necessary work in the orchard and so on. My wife passed away about 3 years ago. So I happily came here to the Calvet home, which is a good place for me. Yes.
Well, we're very grateful for your service and your sharing your story
Thank
with
you.
us.
Thank you very much.
We'd like to hear what is your takeaway from your time in the military that, maybe affected the rest of your life.
Well, I was kind of an eager beaver at the beginning of my service, and in Oklahoma they organized a hardball team. Well, I pitched a lot of ball in high school. I was a pretty good pitcher. And this one lieutenant who was in charge of the baseball team, he wanted me to pitch. He wanted me to, and they took them to different places like Dallas and,
Oh, wow.
to play ball. And it was quite a competitive situation. So this lieutenant really got irritated at me because I wouldn't join his team. And I actually told him that I wasn't there to play ball, I was there to be a soldier, So the captain went on leave one night, and this lieutenant was left in charge of the company. So he immediately called an inspection of everybody, everything, and you had to lay your clothes out, and they would come in and inspect all your clothes and everything that they could find of yours. Well, actually, I kept a safety razor and a comb that I used for nothing but inspections. They were brand new. The comb had never been through my hair. The razor was brand new. It had never been used. Well, this lieutenant found a little piece of lint on my comb and restricted me to the base for 3 days.
Oh.
So when my CO returned, I told him what had happened, and that lieutenant was gone the next day. He transferred him out. He was gone.
Oh.
I don't know whether it was me or whether he had already set up maybe some things that he shouldn't have done. And anyway, I came away from the service. I had a lot of fun in the service. I met a lot of really nice people. And it was a good experience. I enjoyed meeting my CO was a tremendous man. It was just a good thing for me. Good thing for me. I was a 23-year-old first sergeant who was listening to some sad stories from some of our company men who were maybe 35 or so were telling me some of their sad tales, and here I was, a 23-year-old kid that really became kind of like a father to a lot of these people. Anyway, it was a good time for me. Yeah.
Skills you took forward in life.
Yeah, it was. It helped me a lot later in life, really.
So, what do you feel was the toughest part of what you experienced?
The toughest part was probably living out of a home, sometimes in a slit trench with pouring rain. Not a slit trench, but a pup tent. We got bombed, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. No really significant damage. Just kind of a inconvenient way to live. And I'm sure there were a lot of soldiers who had a lot worse life than I did, including my brother. We got into some really bad stuff. So I was lucky a lot in that way, yeah.
So what do you think, what changed you the most, in terms of what kind of a person you were because of your experiences in the military?
Probably the responsibility that I was given when I was a young man, managing about 100 other men, because they're all different. They're all different mentalities and different ways of doing things, and some were tough to manage, some of them were real easy. Joe Slayton, who became a good friend, called me one time. We were living in Manhattan Beach, and he called me. Oh, I don't know. It must have been in the '60s. And I said, "This is Joe," and I recognized his voice. And he said, "Yes." And he was in Palm Springs selling shoes.
Oh.
And he said, "I sure would like to see you." So I went down to see him, and we had a nice chat. And he told me that he had cancer. So, and he didn't live very long after that. So, which is a sad thing to say. But he was a nice man. He was a man that drank a fifth of booze a day. And after we got in the service, I never saw him take any real amount of liquor. He drank and drink, but so it was very good for Joe too. Yeah. So.
Any other benefits that you think may have been a result of your service? Other things that you...
Well, if I can, I'll say a little bit about the Veterans Administration.
Excellent, thank you.
I probably started getting veteran benefits 10, 15 years ago. And I always had what I thought, with almost no exception, good medical care. A couple of the doctors were really top notch. Some were like we are, you know, they're not God. But I had excellent medical care from the Veterans Administration. And it upset me that they were being run down by many people as not giving the veterans care and so on. And perhaps that happened in some cases, which I didn't know of. But to me, the veterans care has been excellent, even right up to this day. Yeah.
So what were you treated for by the VA? If you want to share that, it's, you know, that's certainly private stuff, so you don't have to.
Well, I had some surgery on my hands. What else? Pneumonia. I did have vertigo. Very.
Wow.
I could hardly manage to walk.
Wow.
And a doctor at the Veterans Hospital in Fresno, he was an audiologist, laid me down on a table, and after some maneuvering, it just felt like that vertigo ran right out of my head. And I got off of that table and I was able to walk pretty reasonably well. And I had to go back to him another time, but he cured me of that vertigo.
Nice.
And which another doctor had said, "Oh, it'll go away in 4 or 5 weeks," but it never went away. So.
But no injuries in the service?
No injuries in the service.
Interesting. Wow. Quite a story, sir.
I know, it's a wonderful story.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we thank you for sharing.
I hope that it's
Service.
what you wanted.
You were in one of the most unusual and unique places in that war.
Well, Judy said she had never heard of people being in India,
Yeah,
but it was extensive.
it sure
There were a
was.
lot of military in India and Burma. Burma was a terrible place to fight a war. Lots of jungle, lots of muddy, sloshy, swampy kind of stuff.
Not like Vietnam.
And
Yeah. Well, you're the second veteran that I've done a video with about service in Burma and then India to China.
yeah,
So it's an amazing situation.
Well, and he mentioned the acronym CBI, and I went home and looked it up, and it's China, Burma, India, is that whole theater.
Theater, yeah.
Whereas I think Atlantic Pacific, I don't even think that there is any other.
CBI.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just missed getting to China, but that's another story.
So what is that
I
story?
know, did you want to share that?
Well, if I'd have gotten to China, that would have been a whole new
Oh.
experience because you're talking about a whole other kind of nationality and the way that the war was fought. And if you read the history of the Flying Tigers, it is quite extensive. And they not only fought out of China, they fought in Burma and clear into Thailand and Vietnam.
Yeah,
And in some cases, they got into India.
wow.
Yeah.
So when you were at the 20th in China, what were your duties during that?
We were a truck company,
Right.
and we had quite a few trucks, and most of them were 6x6s, which is a pretty popular military truck. Calcutta was a large port,
Oh, okay.
and we hauled all kinds of things from the port of Calcutta
Oh, okay.
all over to various bases in India. And that mainly was our.
Sure. Well, when you
We
said,
didn't haul any ordnance. We
Yeah.
didn't no guns or but a lot of food and bread and
all the stuff you need to
that
keep
kind
an
of-
army going.
yeah.
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 That's the most important job there is.
Yeah.
Now, when you said the 20th in China, I thought, well, maybe you were in China.
No,
No.
Okay.
no, I just missed it.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
We really appreciate
Thank
that.
you, thank
Okay.
you.
You have a marvelous,
All right.
wonderful story.
It is, Mac.
We're so pleased that you were willing to share it with us.
yeah.